Welcome to our discussion of Dr. Plummer's new book, and Living Faith, the Theology of James. I'm one of the editors of this series, and we're delighted to have Dr. Plummer's book come out. We'll be giving away a couple copies of books in this series, but I'm especially eager. We want to focus today on Dr. Plummer's book. And so, let's begin by asking him what interested you in James in the first place? Why James?
Why did I write this book on James? You sent me an email, and you asked me to write this book.
But I know I did that. But why were you interested in James in the first place?
So when I was hired as a full-time faculty here in 2002, I had to figure out what I was going to do an exegesis class on, because you already were doing Romans, of course, and Seifert was doing Galatians, and other people were doing other things. And recently, Dr. Blevins had retired, and he always did exegesis courses on James. So I felt like that was a nice place to land. It was open. I was not stepping on anybody's toes to do that. I was not, and as I taught that class for several years, different times, and then after I'd done that a while, I got an invitation by Crossway to do the ESV Expositor's Bible Commentary on James, and then Moeller invited me to do the Grace Bible Study Notes on James. So it's kind of, you know this from your own experience. You write something, and then someone associates you. Oh, you're the James guy. And so, you get asked to do more. Remember, Robert Peterson, don't you? Yeah. He did his dissertation on hell, and so he always got invited to write books about hell. Yeah. So I'm glad I didn't do that.
Yeah. So I just want to highlight something Dr. Plummer said, in case you missed it. He has that excellent commentary on James as well in that ESV Expository Commentary series. Those are the 12 volumes in black, right? I think that's volume 12. So that's just an excellent commentary. And that is why, when I became the editor of this series, Crossway was so happy with your commentary. They said, if Dr. Plummer is willing, we really want him to write this book, the Theology. Maybe you could tell us a little bit, why does James interest you in general?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I want to come back and ask you a question about the series in a minute, but when I was writing that commentary originally, the ESV Expositor's Commentary series, I was in the locker room here, and I can't remember the name of the guy who's he's a literary agent. Do you know who I'm talking about? That guy?
Yeah, I can't remember his name either, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I'm doing the commentary on James. He goes, I don't remember exact wording, but basically he said, that's smart. He's like, in commentary series, James always sells the most volumes. Of course, you and I both know that that was by there's no royalties on that. We were just hired to do it. But
right.
But I thought it was funny, and I told him, I'm not doing this to make more money or whatever. But he said, and I think it's an interesting observation. James is such a practical book. People love the book of James. When they choose to do a Bible study in a church, let's do the book of James, because there's no doubt when you leave Sunday school or Wednesday night, that night, how to apply the book. There's no question, about that. I do think sometimes people can lose the Christological underpinnings of the book, but just in terms of application, it's pretty straightforward. I love that. The Greek is mid-level. It's not too difficult, so students can usually follow along in class. It's not the book of Jude or 2 Peter. So this series, which you very graciously invited me to write for, it's co-edited with Brian Rosner, and I'm guessing many of our students don't know who Brian Rosner is. Could you tell them who he is, and also what were you guys trying to accomplish with this?
Yeah, so Brian is a New Testament scholar. He's an Australian. For many years, he was the principal at Ridley College in Melbourne. He just stepped down from that. But Brian is the co-author of the Pillar Commentary on 1 Corinthians, for example. He's written a really nice book in this series edited by Don Carson on the law. Maybe some of you know that book. And actually, how the series came about is, and we're gonna give away a couple of copies. I wrote this book on Revelation, the theology of Revelation, and I did that because I was going to give some lectures at Moore College in Sydney, which those lectures ended up being canceled because of COVID. I never made it that time. But when I handed it in, Justin Taylor of Crossway said, "Why don't we do this for the whole New Testament? And why don't you be the editor?" And I said, "Yeah, I think that's a great idea, but I'd like to get a co-editor and maybe someone outside of, kind of United States circles," and ended up being Brian. So, and kind of the idea of this series is like, if you know the Carson series, those gray volumes on biblical theology, of course, these are devoted to a particular book, but also to be kind of a cut down from the Carson books, a little more accessible. People are probably reading less, and just something that, is accessible and a nice summary of the different New Testament books. So, we're really pleased with the series. It's not done yet. Also from Southern, Dr. Cook is doing John, the Gospel of John. My mind just went blank. Dr. Pennington is doing the Gospel of Matthew as well. Yeah. And my son, Patrick, did Acts. Got to say that. So anyway, Dr. Plummer, tell us, which James is this? Who is this James? There's a lot of Jameses in the New Testament.
Yes, and interestingly, as you guys know, when you open the letter, he only identifies himself as James, a servant or a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. So he really doesn't identify himself beyond that. And also John Calvin suggested maybe it's James, son of Alphaeus. But really from the time of Origen onward, it's recognized that this is almost certainly James, the brother of Jesus. Now we know for a long time the early church had a difficulty with saying that Jesus had brothers who were born of Mary and Joseph. Right? There's an asceticism, a belief in the perpetual virginity of Mary for much of early church history, and so they would say, well, he was a brother, meaning a cousin, or he was a brother. Joseph had children from another marriage before, and his wife died. But as Protestants, we don't have any trouble with the natural reading of the text that after Mary gave birth to Jesus, she and Joseph continued having normal marital relations, and they had other children. And so James was the half-brother of Jesus, and we find him mentioned in Galatians 1. Paul mentions James, the brother of the Lord. 1 Corinthians 15, he mentions explicitly about Jesus appearing to James as one of the apostles, commissioning him as one of the apostles. And in Acts, he has a very prominent role. If you look in Acts 15, who is it that's basically running the Jerusalem council and sending out a letter in the names of the apostles and the elders? And it's James. And so, James was really the leader of the early Jerusalem church.
One question people have about James is, does James fit with the gospel? You kind of mentioned this with Christology, didn't you? There's not a lot about Jesus in this book. Nothing about his death, right? So is James a Christian book, right? Is it a Jewish sermon that has Jesus tacked in twice? Definitely, from reading my book, you were edited with some good edits. It's 100% a Christian book, and one of the beautiful things of it is how much it recapitulates the teaching of Jesus so clearly. So, but in addition to that, there many people, again, when they study James, they started studying it 5 months ago, and now they're in chapter 4, and they lose sight of the clear emphasis on divine sovereignty and on God's purposes and work in salvation. So, for example, in James chapter 1, verse 18, begins there,
because he was willing by choice, the participle boulethes, by choice, he birthed us through the word of truth that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creation. So the emphasis on really divine initiation in our salvation. Why are we Christians? How do we have spiritual birth? Because God so graciously chose to give that to us. And so that, along with other things in the letter, really underlie the appeal. There's lots of appeal, lots of imperatives. The highest percentage of imperatives of any book in the New Testament. But underlying those imperatives is the indicative of what God has done to save us. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many interesting themes in James we can talk about, and I'm going to give you a chance to ask some questions as well, so be thinking about that. But maybe, James is so practical. What would you say in terms of, what do we learn from James about the tongue, about our speech, and maybe I tack on wisdom. What does it mean to be wise?
Yeah.
What is it? What does he teach us about the tongue?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the dominant themes, or the dominant theme of James, is a call to Christian consistency, that we would not just be Christian in name, we would not just say we believe, we would not say we have faith, but we would have a genuine faith that thus produces works, that has work. The exact language of James is that faith has works, right? They use the verb echo. It has works. And so it's not that works are, like if you have genuine faith, then works are added to that, but works are inherent organically in genuine faith that then comes out and is visible to others. And there is a call throughout the letter over and over to consistency. So there's the element of divine sovereignty, but then human responsibility. There's a call to live and be consistent with being the first fruits that God has made us to be. And so you're right that the issue of the tongue is very prominent, especially in chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. And James so pointedly points out that we can't be people who bless God and curse others who are made in His image. We're not to be, just like a fig tree should bear figs. We should bear the fruit of righteousness, and not say one thing or not claim to be one thing and then our speech deny that in the way that we treat other people. So yeah, it's a call to beautiful Christian integrity and consistency in speech, and I think that's especially timely for our age, isn't it? Where you have all these different platforms where we can say things, and sometimes even say things anonymously in social media, where you can post things, and it does seem like people sometimes are who they are in person might be different from the way they act, in social media or online. That they feel there's a freedom to be more, argumentative, or even to be, rude. And I think James, his call to Christian consistency would challenge us to be gentle and kind and peaceable and loving in all of our speech, not just when we're in person, but even on social media. So,
yeah, that's great. So James speaks in chapter 2 about the sin. I mean, this struck me as I was preparing for this again. The sin of partiality. Was that just a problem in James's day? How does that affect us today? Do you see that as still having a big issue in the church, or?
I think it is always going to be an issue with sinful humans to struggle with partiality. Although I think we get more, we're growing our sophistication of being able to hide it. Perhaps it's not, and maybe James is using a really stylized extreme example. Mr. Goldfinger comes in and you say, sit here in this nice seat, and you poor guy with filthy clothes, you can be here by my footstool. So it's a real extreme example. But as he points out there, as you say in chapter 2, to love your neighbor as yourself demands that we not be partial towards people because they're poor or because they're not valued or beautiful by the world standards. So we've probably all seen those YouTube videos where the pastor of the mega church decides to dress up as a homeless guy, right? You've seen these, and he sits outside his church and no one pays any attention to him, and then he gets up and he's like, "I'm your pastor," and everyone's like, "Huh." But we realize that's artificial, and probably that megachurch has never had a homeless person sitting outside of it, so that people don't know what to do with that. It's not really a genuine example. But I do think, I think of an example. When I was in mainland China, I was working with people there, and I was talking about what some churches do in America when they raise money for buildings. And I said, they have like a meal where they will invite large donors to come to that. And they were incredulous that Christians in America could so violate the clear teaching. They're like, so you treat the rich people in the church differently? You're like, you invite them to a meal and you don't invite the poor people? And I'm like, that's what they do. And if you think about it, it is, from a fundraising perspective, you might say it's very strategic, but it does call into question if we don't rationalize treating people differently in some ways. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So I think I'll ask one more question. I have more, and it depends on what but I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions as well. But everybody wants to know, right, about the faith and works.
Yeah.
And right, Luther. What did Luther say? If you can harmonize Paul and James, I'll put a doctor's cap on you and call you a fool.
Yeah.
Or
let them call him a fool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then didn't he say another time? Sometimes I just want to throw Jimmy into the stove.
I've heard that quote.
So maybe that's apocryphal.
Yeah.
But so and as you know, many scholars who aren't evangelicals, even some who are somewhat conservative, will say, no, James and Paul just contradict. No one who believes in inerrancy. But can you help us on that? I think often for us as evangelicals, that's our first question reading James. Like, how does that fit with the gospel? How does that fit with Paul?
Yeah. So it's a legitimate question. It is noteworthy, isn't it, that the early church saw no contradiction because they included it in the canon, right? And I'm not a Lutheran scholar, but my understanding is that Luther did continue to quote from, refer to James, even preach or teach from James, so that like he said these things, but then maybe he wasn't consistent with his strong statements. He was
and said something like it's not one of the chief books, but still in the canon. Still,
he moved it, didn't he, in his German canon? I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
Perhaps to the end, but he actually said some things that are wonderful summaries of James' theology. And in fact, in this volume, if you look in the front, the first two large quotes there in the beginning, just sort of a frontispiece, are quotes from Luther about how any genuine faith will be living and active and visible and produce works. And it's really just James, I think. So I've heard, this is not original to me, I'm sure you've said similar things, is that people sometimes will pit Paul against James, like they're fighting each other, but really they're back to back, aren't they? And Paul is fighting works righteousness, people who think, and simplifying this, but he's fighting people who think that by their good deeds and merit they can earn their salvation. And many times he seems to be countering that. And then James is fighting a nominalism. He's fighting people who just have a verbal affirmation. You believe that God is one. Good job, right? Even the demons believe that and shudder. So he's countering this idea that, as we read in 2:18, well, someone will say, you have faith, I have works. And so that you can separate the two. You have two spiritual gifts. One person has the gift of works and one person has the gift of faith. And he says, no, show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. So every genuine faith, and he goes on again to talk about a faith as a verse, actually backing up to verse 17, faith, if it does not have works, again the language of having works, is dead in and of itself. And if you keep going there, that language, show me this, show me this. I think it's the language of evidence, the language of visible representation of, and that seems to be the category. He's like, so when he's talking about Abraham, Rahab, all that, I think he's like, this is how we see that they really were believers, that they really had faith by the evidence. And I know there's a debate about how to translate dikaiao, but I do think within this literary context and the semantic range of it, I think the New Living Translation really essentially gets it right. It's showed to be righteous, shown to be righteous. And even the Catholic scholar Patrick Harton, who you would expect maybe a Catholic scholar would want to find sort of a little bit more of a theology of works justification, but he argues that, the language here so strongly favors dikaiao, meaning show to be righteous, evidence to be righteous, things like that. So, yeah.